Alex, the one downside of being in the silent auditorium with people having to listen in is I couldn't play the Darth Vader music when we were coming on stage. So,
Right.
But do you have your earpiece in? Oh, you got the lanyard.
But I'm not sure. Is it working?
No, you're good. You're good.
I'm good.
I can hear it now. Can everyone hear Alex? Okay, good. I was excited to have this conversation because you and I have had a few interactions and chatted a few times, and I'm always drawn to controversial projects because it means something is going right. I think if no one uses your product and no one actually cares, then it's not controversial, right? So that's one way to avoid controversy. But people are paying attention. You've had a huge year, and I was excited to have this conversation just to demystify where Worldcoin is now, what you're doing, what is the scale of like the ambition of the project, and maybe take on head on some of the FUD or some of the criticisms of the project, and just kind of hear how you're thinking about de-risking some of these things for what is extremely high potential as a project if it's done right. So we're going to cover a lot of ground in 20 minutes, but why don't we start by at least kind of level setting with everybody, just take a step back outside of the stare into the orb and sell my biometrics. Like, people will see the 140 characters on the project, and I don't think that necessarily does it justice, at least to the vision, and we'll get into the rest. But let's start at least with the aspiration of the project and kind of where you think you are right now.
Right. So we started working on the project 3.5 years ago, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam Altman, of course, is co-founder of the project, and he's been working on AI for quite some time. And so the main motivation actually was to build infrastructure for a world in which AI becomes increasingly powerful. That was like one of the founding motivations, and that now, of course, recent times feels very relevant, but that's not the case since we started.
Mm-hmm.
Like, AI is a pretty recent topic in mainstream. So, and why do we think Worldcoin matters for this, and how do we get there? Is that, for one, Worldcoin is three things. It's a very foundational way to prove personhood with a biometric device called the orb in a privacy-preserving manner. So essentially, you have to show up physically to a device, and after 20 seconds, you receive a physical proof of personhood that then you can use on the internet to verify yourself across different services. Second, it's a digital token that essentially acts as incentive alignment for the network. And then three, there is also an app that we operate, which is a non-custodial wallet, and it's the first app that actually supports using Worldcoin, but many others will follow. Like, I hope at least all the major crypto wallets that you use will support it too. And why those two things are important is that proof of personhood in the first place is something that is not solved right now on the internet. I think the only alternative that we have really is government KYC, which I think is something we cannot or should not use on a global scale in the coming years. Plus, we also believe that as AI becomes increasingly powerful, you will need some kind of mechanism like this on the internet, right? So Elon talks about that a lot on Twitter with bots and something similar. But then even stepping back and looking in the future, like what's kind of the maximum thing this can achieve, is that once you have proof of personhood, you have Sybil resistance, and once you have that, plus a token that has some meaningful value, you can create incentive alignment to really scale a network, bootstrap a network at a large scale. Mm-hmm. So the ultimate goal of Worldcoin is to really become and kind of accelerate this whole transition into crypto and decentralized finance on a global scale, and ultimately reach billions of people. And then how that interacts with AI is that we think, first, proof of personhood matters. Second, governance over AI system matters and will matter, and that we have a way to do it democratically will matter. And then third, we think universal basic income will happen probably in the next 20 years, and that Worldcoin might be one possible way to actually deliver on that as infrastructure.
There's really, I think, three things to unpack when you talk about Worldcoin. So one is the onboarding process for users. Two is the token distribution, and then the incentive alignment and kind of governance of this system. both today and kind of at scale. And then 3 is the utility of this universal proof of personhood application, if you'll call it that, and how robust the ecosystem is that evolves around Worldcoin. And we were talking about this backstage, but I think one of the early narrative issues that I would argue you guys struggle with is you're in the network bootstrapping phase. So you're in like the 0 to 1, okay, we need to onboard people into the system. We have to figure out what the incentive alignment is. But because you can't build a network until people are in the network, like it's tough to necessarily build a robust ecosystem of apps around that. So we're going to tackle those one at a time, but just to demystify the process, I remember, I don't know if, I think you might have been there with the orb, or someone from the Worldcoin team was back at Bitcoin Miami a couple of years ago, and we had a cocktail hour, and someone brought the orb and was onboarding people at the event. And I can't remember if I actually did it. I'd be surprised if I did, but I can't remember if I actually stared into the orb or not, but I just remember that was the first time I actually saw it. Stare into the orb. We're going to give you, basically a verified digital identity, and at some point there will be, tokens, or could be, not just the Worldcoin tokens, but other UBI programs maybe tied to this, or other incentive programs tied to this. Talk about that process and like the security that's gone into that, because I think the water frequently gets muddied between these 3 areas. Talk about the tech and the security assumptions that you've made on the way in on a per person basis as step 1, and then we'll talk about kind of step 2.
Okay. So first, outlining the problem, which I think is important to understand why the device even exists. And I will keep that short. But to solve proof of personhood, you need to solve uniqueness, essentially. So how can you prove as a user that you're actually unique in a global set of users, global set of members? And your iPhone and all the other biometrics you usually use, they actually don't do that. They do a one-to-one comparison. There is an embedding stored on my phone that knows essentially, okay, this is how Alex looks like. I try to use my phone again. New embedding gets created, matched to this one previous one, and if that works, I can use my phone. And other than fraud, that's fairly easy because it's very hard for me to look exactly like you. To solve proof of personhood, however, you need to create kind of one embedding of everyone, compare it against everyone else, make sure that comparison works, and then issue this proof of personhood. And that's very hard because you go from one to n to one to many, one to n. And so that's the first answer of why phones do not work. Like phone cameras just could not get enough resolution, enough entropy out of everyone to actually do such a proof. And so we had to build a physical device that actually does that. And it turns out that within biometrics, within biometrics, there's really only the eye that has enough entropy to actually distinguish billions of people. Fingerprints, face, all of these things do not work. And so the orb at core, first, there's a couple sensors in front that first check that you're not actually trying to fool the orb or fool the device with a display or more sophisticated attacks, but you're an actual real person showing up. So that's a couple neural networks on the device that check with a depth sensor and a thermal camera that just check, okay, you're an actual person. But nothing actually gets stored. It's really just neural networks that check, okay, is this a valid sign-up, yes or no? They give a flag, yes, valid sign-up. Then a picture of the eye is taken in infrared, which is actually very, like at pretty much every airport at this point that happens. So it's very common technology at this point. It's just that the orb actually has better resolution and some other things. And then calculates a unique embedding out of this picture. So you have a neural network that just takes information out of this, calculates embedding, and signs it. Before that sign up actually happens, you as a user, you have a non-custodial wallet installed. You create a separate key pair to your Ethereum key pair, but it is also built on top of Ethereum. It's called Semaphore from the Ethereum Foundation. So you create this key pair, and you essentially air gap that public key to the orb with a QR code. After the sign up, so after this unique embedding is calculated, that embedding gets shared with a uniqueness servers that right now is a database that we run. After we have to solve some research questions, but nothing unsolvable. It will be an actual blockchain where that happens. Uniqueness check happens. Essentially, the key gets inserted into a Merkle tree. And now comes the important piece. How, as a user, I actually prove that I'm unique and I'm part of Worldcoin, I have a world ID, is that I do a zero knowledge proof on that Merkle tree, essentially. So what that means is that my actual wallet is fully separate from the sign-up process. So I remain anonymous, and I think that's what we want to achieve. So,
there's a few things in that 0 to 1. That step one, if you will, that I think has raised some concerns. One is, by definition, it's hardware, so you need to centrally manufacture it, and and so there is some trust assumptions that go into that. And then two might be, you might argue, it's more of a temporary condition where you guys are managing the central database, and ultimately that will be decentralized. So where, what steps have you taken or do you plan to take next to kind of de-risk those two areas? Those are probably the two big ones that I've heard, but maybe there are others.
So on the hardware side, essentially where this will go is that most of the designs are already open source, the hardware designs, other than the security critical pieces, which I guess you get why, because it's security critical, but also these will become open source. And then what we will strongly push for is that you have other entities also manufacturing these devices. And in the beginning, you have the foundation just commissioning the keys to actually let these devices insert users into the user set. It's important to understand that you could also later on decide to ignore all of the signups that happen with one of those devices if it turns out to be fraudulent or something like that. So first, this will be the foundation. At some point, it actually can be the DAO that does this key commissioning. So it's of course like a much more complicated path to decentralization than other crypto projects maybe have, but it is fundamentally possible, and it's actually one of our biggest internal focus areas to just like push that forward. So I think there's a pretty clear path with some complexity, but can happen in the next 2 years for sure. And then on the uniqueness side and decentralizing that, I think that's actually that's a solved problem, because you start with an MPC setup where you then at the beginning you have some trusted parties versus one, to then actually transition to kind of a blockchain. So we have in our public white paper, I think all of these steps are listed at least in all the detail that we understand today.
Yeah. My friend Dan Elitzer, investor in the space, he probably had maybe one of the best critical questions that I think you have probably answered a few times now. But he says, even if WorldCoin's tech is rock solid and their approach to privacy is trustworthy, isn't it a terrible idea to train people that it's okay to let their biometric data be captured on third-party devices?
I think that's actually one of the generally better questions. I think that's like a very fair criticism. I mean, obviously, I do think it's fair, and the only thing I would respond to that is I think, well, first of all, you do it for your government, which in Europe and US is very clear, but in many other governments that it's maybe a less good idea. Second, you do it on your phone. You do it on the majority of your phones already, and it's not fundamentally different actually. So Samsung had kind of a large-scale device that did essentially the same thing. The Vision Pro is also doing iris scans, right? So I think biometrics have already entered our world in a very significant basis. And what I hope we can achieve as Worldcoin is that we can prove to the world that this is actually truly an open source and privacy preserving option towards, I think, a major trend the whole world is entering anyways. So I think like this is counterintuitive, especially to crypto people, because you have biometrics and all of these things, but I actually do think Worldcoin is naturally, like it comes from that place, right? It's like it's a privacy preserving open source alternative to government IDs essentially. And that's just the ID piece, of course, but
All right, so I think we've kind of well covered step one of the process. Step two is where the token comes in. And look, I think it's easy for folks to take a look at the price chart and then just quote tweet or dunk on the fact that from the distribution a couple months ago now, right? July?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not a great looking price chart, but not a lot of price charts look good in crypto this year in general. So, without getting into like the number go up, number go down, kind of short-termism, talk a little bit about the importance of the Worldcoin token just as an incentive alignment mechanism, and then why you came to market the way that you did with kind of low initial distribution and kind of like reserving a significant portion of the supply for future utility, future partnerships, future onboarding, because I think that initial kind of bootstrapping, even the people that have maybe gotten over the hump on the biometric side, now they've got another element of the project that they can object to, maybe not even being fully informed on it, or at least their guard is up and they're I don't want to call it a bullshit meter, but they're out of the things that would draw attention to crypto projects, negative attention like that has raised a couple flags for people. So what would you say in terms of the initial distribution decisions that were made and kind of why they were made, and how people should think about the long-term design that you have in mind?
Sure. So we launched a token outside of the US in July. So I think why we did that decision is pretty clear to you, and probably the listeners. It's around the regulatory unclarity and uncertainty in the US. So we actually went very strict in that direction. And on the price start, well, as I think you're aware, is like the FTV is fairly high. So I think from that,
you could say that.
Yeah, you could probably say that. So I think we're doing fine. But so first of all, why is there a token, right? And I think you actually nailed it, which is incentive alignment to grow the network. And I think if we look back for the case that Worldcoin works, which I hope and think it does, if we look back in 5 years from now of why did it work, we've never seen incentive alignment of billions of dollars around network growth. Just never, right? Like Bitcoin aligned incentives around securing the network, billions of dollars every year, which was very effective. But you could not align incentives around the growth of the network. But many people tried in the past with airdrops and all these things. Mm-hmm. They always failed because there was no proof of person mechanism. So you had like bots coming in and faulty actors, right? So I think it's the first time we will hopefully see how this actually plays out at a meaningful scale. So you have billions of dollars aligned around actually growing a network to hopefully hundreds of millions and eventually billions of people. And then of course the decentralization of the protocol. That's kind of why the other big thing why tokens obviously matter. So you want to decentralize the governments, the governance over the system, and the value capture of the system and all of these things. And so why, to now get to your second part of the question, which was around kind of why did we launch the way we did, that actually would be helpful if you guide me a little bit of like where specifically do you want me to go?
Well, how about the low float, right?
Low float.
I think that's the one. People look at the discrepancy between the fully diluted value of the network, the low float initially, the insiders that had a lot of incentive to invest early and then potentially sell secondary once the network launched. So I think it's there might be good reasons for the way that was originally designed, but walk through some of the trade-offs and things that you guys considered.
Sure. So like the float is just a simple function of the whole point of Worldcoin is that actually the majority of the token supply reaches billions of people eventually. Mm-hmm. And we actually take this very seriously. Like this is not bullshitting. This is actually what we try to do. And so we have 2.3 million signups now. And if 2.3 million signups would get 10% of the network, I think it's very clear to understand how that doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
right? So we knew going into this launch that we might get flagged for this in the short term, but then also you should not run any business like this or any idea like this optimized for the short term. So with what we actually want to achieve, distributing a token to as many people as we possibly can, that was a simple trade-off. Doing an airdrop to kind of crypto community or Twitter or something just also did not feel right.
Yep.
What we tried to achieve. So this was just like, okay, we're gonna kind of bite in the lemon here and go for it. Which I think is also important, but maybe less obvious to outsiders. Of course, insiders are actually locked up. So while investors could do somewhat kind of illegal secondaries with each other, technically they would need to get board approval, which they would not get. So there is no like secondary market or people getting rich off like the launch or something. So that's just not a thing. And then second question, low float. What was the second part?
Well, and just I think you just answered it with the insiders.
Yeah.
So I know people are going to watch this and they're going to say like, oh, I should have hit you like harder on like all the details of the tokens. We only have 20 minutes. We're already at time. But I want to ask one more question because I think growth cures. Growth is a cure-all in a lot of different settings, and I don't think Worldcoin is any different. So at what point do you expect to start seeing some real applications built around Worldcoin, not just being part of this bootstrapping phase? It seems a little sci-fi and has people with their guards up and easy. Quite frankly, in some respects, like it is a little bit easy to dunk on until you've actually peered into the tech and you understand the logic of why the system is designed the way that it is. But where do you expect to see the initial heat? Have you seen initial heat in terms of other projects or other applications getting built using this universal proof of personhood?
Yep, there's a lot of projects that want to, but I do think it's just not practical right now. In that sense that like we are still at 300 devices live, and it will only start becoming practical for like high economic value use cases once it's accessible at least all the major economic regions. All the major economic like cities. So essentially, we just have to deliver on operational follow-through now, and really kind of scale that distribution globally, reach all the major cities. It's pretty simple. It's just a lot of work. It's like we have a long list of markets, cities that we need to enter and kind of get through, and that's what we're working on. And so I think you're going to see some very cool things happening in the next 3, 4, 5 months. I think these will be much more of like dreaming where this can go in the future versus like Worldcoin is absolutely critical for a certain use case. I think until we see these, it's probably going to be another 12 months probably, just given how I think about the operational rollout.
Are you scanning eyeballs here?
I think so. I just arrived right before, but I think we do.
All right, so everybody has been able to hear directly from Alex, and you can make your own decision on whether you want to get your iris scanned and partake in the project. But I think I'm probably most excited about this as a part one, and then next year we'll see where the project is 12 months later after an interesting high chaos, high news year for the projects getting out of the gate. So I appreciate you coming, and hopefully people got a bit out of this and demystifying where the project is, where it's going to head.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.